this part of the country and is fetching money for us for economic development. So they have advantage, something like a small blackmail, if I put it in a blunt and say. So if they don't do it, do you have alternative? Can you do it yourself? You know, and that is where we ought to have been thinking of, can we, or how, if they don't, and we say go away, can you take over and take over effectively? So that might be responsible for allowing this shift, you know, to take place. It's
but if that was the earlier thinking. Attitude,
yes,
if that was the earlier attitude at the beginning,
before that, because that is probably what conditioned our making a law, you know, as an alternative that look very cheap, and an alternative for them as escape route. So that is my thinking.
Yes, but what I'm saying again is, yes, gentlemen, if, as you say, that was the earlier attitude, okay, yeah, we want, you know, oil has been discovered in our country, okay, we want it explored, we want to, you know, of course, get the economic advantage of it. But of course, those that are coming have the comparative advantage. Yeah. That was the earlier attitude. Yeah. But flaring has been outlawed for the past 3 decades.
I know. I have told you.
Yes.
It's outlawed, but there's alternative. If you flare, you pay penalty. And the penalty is cheap. It is outlawed, yes. But there's alternative. If it's complete outlaw, and there's no 10 naira, you know, to pay per flare, then then there's no escape route.
Are there specific laws, legislation that have been put in place, you know, towards the?
Yes, there is.
Yeah.
There is.
Can you talk us through some of those?
That is the law that I told you made provision that if you flare 1 cubic feet of gas, you pay 10 naira. That's what I'm saying. It's contained in the law. The law says don't flare, yes. But if you have to, for whatever reason, whether, you know, you cannot use it to bring in more crude, and you cannot reject it, and you had to flare, you pay this. So
what was the wisdom in that, Justice? What was the wisdom? You want to end something, but you're providing another, you know, loophole. I mean, you're providing another avenue for the operators to, you know, to hide under. So what's the wisdom in?
Well, I wouldn't say government provide a wisdom.
Yes, because if you're saying stop, but if you must do, this is an alternative. What's the wisdom in
for
such
any
a
reason
law?
that you have to flare? So that starts like as a punitive measure, but it's not punitive enough. That's the point. And
it's not even punitive.
Yeah, well,
it's not punitive. You are providing an alternative.
So just to give us some bit of a perspective, yes, it's been there as a problem that has been bedeviling the country, and in particular the Niger Delta. And one key thing about this issue is that gas fire knows no boundary. It doesn't know the rich or the poor. It doesn't know the old or the young. It cuts across board. Now, so successive government have tried to make efforts to reduce gas fire or to bring it to as low as reasonably practicable. And in the past decade, we've made some progress that we've done at least close to 70%. And so we can give some credit to the NNPC and the joint venture partners, the oil companies. But the volume of gas fire is still worrisome. Worrisome in the sense that last year we flared about, per day, we flare 888 million scoff. I saw in your initial intro, you mentioned that number. It's actually 888 million scoff per day. Now, if you look at that dual of 2017, it was around 324 BCF of gas that were flared. In terms of value erosion, economic value erosion, is around $1 billion US. Now, the emission, the 22 million tons CO2 that we emit, if we take it to the carbon market, that gives us 500 million US. So let me come back. What we found out when we came on board to say, why has this...
Can I interrupt you? Let me interrupt you. So when we come back after the short break, we want to go on a short break now. You will tell us what you have found out.
Right.
All right. This is Late Edition, and we're looking at combination of policy interventions in government's efforts to end gas flaring and, of course, channel it into productive economic advantage. We'll be right back. Welcome back. This is Late Edition. Today we're looking at combination of policy interventions in government's efforts to end gas flaring and channel it into productive economic advantage. And Honourable Joseph Akinlaja, Chairman, House Committee on Petroleum Resources Downstream, as well as Justice Derefaka, Programs Manager, Nigeria Gas Flare Commercialization Program, NGFCP, are my two guests. Gentlemen, thank you once again for joining me for this discussion. Justice, yes, I paused you at the point where you were talking about your findings. Okay. Yes, can you continue?
All right. So, like I did mention, there has been some bit of improvement, up to 70% decline, as opposed to where we were with respect to gas flaring in the country. And that's some credit that we can give to the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation and, of course, the oil and gas producing companies. But even at that,
in terms of 70% decline, what does that amount to in terms of the number of...
decline in the sense that we were number 2 in the world of gas flare nations. Okay. And then we moved to number 5. Now we are number 7 in the League of Gas Flare Nations. And so we looked at all of these issues and say, how can we move out of this League of Gas Flare Nations? Because that's not the league we want to be. Just like in a typical football league, people want to be number 1, but we want to be out of that league. And so government came up with some intervention to say, we need to come up with policy commitment. And then on top of that, this government is one administration that has taken, has bitten the bullet to say, gas flaring has to stop in our oil and gas fields.
How many flare, let's be exact. In my introduction, I mentioned an approximation of the number of gas flare points we have across the country. Do we have the exact number? How many gas flare points and how much, is each of these areas, yes, flaring?
Okay, so permit me to give you some bit of a background. Yeah. I'll come from a global perspective, then I'll hit it on what Nigeria has. Globally, there are 16,000 gas flare locations, 16,000 in 90 countries, including this one we're living in. And in those 16,000 locations, we flare around 145 to 150 billion cubic meters of gas annually. Now, if you convert that, that can generate 750 billion kilowatts of electricity that can power the entire African continent annually, but we waste it. In terms of climate change impact, we emit close to 350 to 400 million tons of CO2 in this climate change issue that we're talking about. And in terms of valuation, it's around $10 billion US on the gas that will flare, and the CO2 emission credit is around $6 billion at $15. Now, coming back to Nigeria where we live, we have, as of today, by our records, we did some scrubbing. Now we developed a new template called the Detailed Information Request, which we developed with our development partners in the NGFCP. So the World Bank, the USAID, and the United Kingdom DFID Foster organizations. And then we work with DPRO, the Ministry of Petroleum Resources as well, and send it to the producers. So initially it was 140, 150 flare sites, but today on record we have 178 gas flare locations in the Niger Delta. And these are oil and gas exploration and production locations. But if you use satellite will give you a different number. And this is why. So if you use satellite, the satellite will pick those illegal bunkering sites as flare locations. So then it now gets to around 220, 230. But for typical E&P gas flare locations, as on record, it's 178. But when we looked at the projections on the different locations and oil fields, it will get to 188 by the time we're asking all the producers, again in line with the new regulations, to send in data. We're looking to having 188 gas flare locations spread across the Niger Delta, onshore, swamp, deep water, and shallow water locations.
Okay, now let us look at, zooming into this policy combination, of which the Nigerian Commercialization Program is one of, is a platform. Going by the nomenclature, is it merely, is it fundamentally tailored to generate revenue?
Okay, I won't take it from that end.
Yes, because it says
I understand your question,
flare commercialization.
Nigerian Gas Flare Commercialization Program. So this is a program designed by the federal government to implement federal government policy objectives to ensure gas flare elimination in an oil field in the 2-3 year term, to bring in multiplier developmental outcomes for the country and for the Niger Delta. So what gave birth to the NGFCP is that Mr. President Muhammad Buhari was at the United Nations Climate Change Conference in Paris in 2015 called the COP21. Now at COP21 he made a commitment that he will include gas flaring and he will reduce greenhouse gas, looking at all sectors of the economy. So he made a committal statement at the international level. And in our international national determined contribution, gas flaring is one of it. Now, Mr. President came back to the country and ratified that agreement to demonstrate that he's serious about this. Okay. And then the ministry, the director of the ministry, of course, you know, he's a petroleum minister, and then the ministry under the Honourable Minister for State, Dr. Ibe Kachiku, we formulated the national gas policy, which was approved by Mr. President. Now, in that national gas policy, Chapter 6, Section 6.4, page 60 to 64, talks about gas flaring reduction. So government said they will now make sure that there's gas capture utilization, and they work with industry, development partners, gas flare-out capture technology, and investors. So that gave birth to the NGFCP. Now, there's one thing to come up with a policy, and there's another thing to implement it. And so, again, like you asked previously, why have this thing lingered so long? Implementation is a problem. A structure to implement it. So the framework is the national gas policy, plus the 7 big wins of the petroleum sector. Big win number 3 is gas revolution. And inside the gas revolution, you have gas flare reduction in it. Okay. So after that, then the president, the ministry now established the Nigerian gas flare commercialization program, which was approved by the Federal Executive Council. Now, with this program, so what this program is doing, we had 6 key fundamental principles that guide the implementation of the NGFCP. Number 1, it's not about revenue, it's gas flare must be reduced. That's the number 1 fundamental principle. Number 2, it must benefit the Niger Delta community. Number 3, it must positively impact the Nigerian economy. Number 4, the program must be market-driven. Number 5, it is going to be bankable to investors and lenders. And then number 6, it must not have adverse effect on the exploration and production of the producers. So what is government trying to do with NGFCP? What is it all about? In the simple layman term.
Please, I need to bring in Honourable, you're also aware of this commercialization program.
Yes.
What are your thoughts, from the legislative point of view?
Well, we got their input into the effort that we're trying to make in this 8th National Assembly on the petroleum industry bill, especially the fiscal bill, which will amend the Petroleum Act and all these acts, and especially will amend that act, which I told you, on gas, development generally, the part of which is concerned gas flaring. So we got their input, the input of the Ministry of Petroleum Resources and other stakeholders too, to ensure that the law which has been on